Westminster Confession this morning. We're looking at the 7th chapter, and we're in the 5th section. The 7th chapter has been talking about the covenants, God's covenant with mankind, and we've been making our way through the definition of the covenant and how we are to understand our relationship to it today. I want to pick up with the 5th section, and that will consider the Old Testament as God's covenant, and then next time, God willing, not next week, but the following week, we'll look at the next section, which will talk about the New Testament. But let's hear the reading from chapter 7, section 5. This covenant was differently administered in the time of the law and in the time of the gospel. Under the law, it was administered by promises, prophecies, sacrifices, circumcision, the Paschal Lamb, and other types and ordinances delivered to the people of the Jews, all foresignifying Christ to come, which were for that time sufficient and efficacious through the operation of the Spirit to instruct and build up the elect in faith in the promised Messiah, by whom they had full remission of sins and eternal salvation, and is called the Old Testament. We've made the observation that God's covenant is a covenant of grace to us in Christ, whereby our sins are forgiven, we are renewed in the presence of God, we have everlasting life through faith in Jesus. That covenant has its origins all the way back in the time of Adam and Eve. It goes through the Old Testament period of time, and then comes into full flower and full realization in the New Covenant with the arrival of Jesus and with the advance of the kingdom of God. Our section of the covenant this morning, of the confession this morning, takes us through that old covenant period of time, that Old Testament period of time, and it tries to show how, in brief order, everything that occurred under the Old Testament pointed ahead to what Christ would do for us at the cross. And the Old Testament had various windows, various prisms through which we could see glimpses, shadows, and types of the coming of Christ and what He would do. And so what we have in the New Testament is not something entirely different from the Old Testament, but rather the continuing unfolding of the Old Covenant promises and types until they come to realization in Christ and in the New Covenant period of time. You may recall that in Galatians, Paul makes the argument about the relationship between the promise given to Abraham long ago, whereby God preached the gospel to Abraham. And Abraham was justified, as Paul argues in Romans 4, just like we are, through faith in the promises of God. And this promise made to Abraham was a promise that continued on during the period of Moses. Paul makes the point that the law of Moses does not abolish or do away with the promise. Rather, it supplements and informs and sustains and supports the promise as it goes forward. And so when we come to the law of Moses and we have the rules and regulations of the Ten Commandments, the moral law of God, that law is not designed to give us a path to eternity by our perfect obedience to this law. That was not the purpose of it. In fact, it really came to show us our sin and how far short we fall from God's standard of righteousness. The law also came to drive us to Christ, to point us to the one who alone fulfilled that law perfectly for us. Jesus is the one who obeyed that law in every aspect. And I should say, the obedience of Jesus did not merely include, as though that were enough, really include the moral law of God, the Ten Commandments, but also include the civil and ceremonial aspects of the law. even to the point of his being presented to the temple for circumcision on the 8th day, and all the different aspects of his life in observing the Old Covenant rituals and types of festivals and so forth. Jesus obeyed every aspect of the law for us. And in Jesus, those commands were fulfilled. We could say then that in Jesus, the Old Covenant types and shadows were done away with because the substance had arrived with Jesus himself. So the moral law of God, the civil and ceremonial aspects of that law do not do away with the promise made to Abraham, really going back to Adam and Eve in the garden, but they don't do away with that promise, but they support it, and the promise continues on. Remember, Jesus said about Abraham that he rejoiced to see my day. He saw it and was glad. In some way, Abraham saw the coming Christ. In shadow form, in type form, but he saw the coming of Christ. He saw that in his son Isaac when he took him up on the mountain to sacrifice him there. God gave him an emblem of what God himself would do in sending his son to die for us. And so the promise was given to Abraham. Again, Paul says the gospel was preached to Abraham. Abraham believed God and it was imputed to him for righteousness. That's the exact same way in which we are saved. It's through faith in God and his promises and his word. It's through the imputation of God's righteousness to us through faith. In these ways, God calls us to be his own children. And so Abraham was not saved in a unique and different way, some way of faith that was separate from what we have today, as though he just believed in the promise of God with the stars, his descendants like the stars of the sky and the sand of the sea, and just believed in the promise of the land and so forth. And that was all that he was concerned about, these outward things. No, Abraham saw through them to the greater things that God had in mind for him. Hebrews tells us that he saw a country that was to come, a heavenly city whose builder and architect was God. And so Abraham looked beyond the elementary things, family, the descendants, the land, and so forth, to the real heart of the promises. Eternal life in the kingdom of God. Redemption, forgiveness of sins, resurrected life. And so our confession points us to these aspects of the Old Covenant period of time. All of the various elements of the law, the promises, prophecies, sacrifices, circumcision, Paschal lamb, and so forth, all that foresignify the Christ to come. And so the image here, if I can make it like this, is the sun coming through the window and Christ standing in history, and the Old Covenant is this way, and all the Old Covenant people had was the shadow of Christ cast before them. And they could see the outline of who it is to come, but they couldn't see the specific figure. But when Christ enters history, you could see him in his substance, that Christ had come. And so the Old Covenant shadows and types went away with the arrival of Christ. And it's not that they were false or pointing us in a different direction. They were all united to Christ who would come. So when we look at the Old Testament, this reminds us that the promises given in the Old Covenant had a spiritual application. They were not merely interested in earthly things. So many people today get caught up in prophecies about Jerusalem and the establishment of the city of Jerusalem back in 1948, and the return of the Jews to that. They're looking at that as a fulfillment of prophecy and God having a great thing there, and then the establishment of the city. God's purpose is not just for an earthly city, but it's for the church Our citizenship is in heaven. That is the real Jerusalem. Not an earthly city filled with unbelieving people who are hostile to Jesus as the Son of God. The Jerusalem that the Gospel points us to is the Jerusalem that is above, and that is our heavenly city. And so they foresignify the Christ to come, and in that period of time they were sufficient and efficacious through the operation of the Spirit. So as the Jewish believer brought his offerings to the temple, the lamb was sacrificed, the grain offerings were received, and so forth, that was used by God to grant that individual forgiveness of sins. And it pointed to the once-for-all sacrifice of Christ on the cross. And they were effective for them, for their salvation. All that by the work of the Spirit. In shadow and type form, but still in reality, in truth. And so, even in the Old Testament, you have believers in the Lord who are saved by grace through faith and have the remission of their sins and eternal life. This is called the Old Testament. Next time we'll continue with the New Testament and see what God has done to explode, to reveal in its fullness the great covenant of grace that's given to